Welcome back to Mystery Minds, the channel where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime, uncovering stories that shock, intrigue, and leave us questioning the world around us. Today, we peel back the shiny facade of our city skylines to uncover a sinister underbelly, a tale of greed, corruption, and blood-soaked foundations. This is the story of the Mafia's control of construction, the hidden costs of your city's skyline. A tale of unchecked power, shadowy deals, and a chilling conspiracy. This case will leave you asking, how much of your city's success was built on fear and violence? Stay with us as we unravel this complex web of deceit. What if the buildings you walk past every day, shiny glass skyscrapers, luxury condos, and bustling office towers were built not by visionaries but by criminals? Behind the towering skyline of Metro City lies a secret history of extortion, intimidation, and deadly greed. This is a story of how the Mafia infiltrated the construction industry, leaving a trail of ruined lives and shattered dreams. The story begins in the late 1980s, a time when Metro City was on the brink of transformation. The skyline was evolving rapidly, with new skyscrapers and luxury developments rising almost overnight. To the outside world, it seemed like a period of unmatched progress. Behind the scenes, however, a far more sinister force was shaping the city. The booming construction industry had become the perfect playground for organized crime, and at the center of it all was Vince Salerno, a feared mob boss with an iron grip on the city's underworld. Salerno saw opportunity where others saw brick and steel. With a sprawling network of influence, he and his crew manipulated every level of the construction process. Using a web of shell companies, they submitted bids that were impossible to compete with. Once these companies secured the contracts, the real work began not on the construction sites, but in dark corners where backroom deals were struck and threats were whispered. Salerno's operation wasn't just about money, it was about total control. The Mafia's scheme ran deep. Developers eager to stay on schedule were forced to comply, often under the threat of violence. Subcontractors who refused to play by Salerno's rules quickly found themselves out of business or worse. Equipment mysteriously vanished from job sites, fires broke out in warehouses, and workers disappeared without explanation. Those who resisted were silenced, either through intimidation or acts of calculated brutality. Salerno's enforcer, Marco the Hammer Giordano, became infamous for his ruthless methods, ensuring that compliance was never optional. As the Mafia tightened its grip, the city's legitimate construction companies began to crumble under the pressure. Small businesses, unable to compete with Salerno's low bids or survive the constant threats, were driven to bankruptcy. Meanwhile, developers found themselves trapped in a cycle of dependency. Salerno's crew provided cheap labor, cut-rate materials, and the promise of problem-free operations. In exchange, they demanded exorbitant fees and unwavering loyalty. What made Salerno's operation particularly insidious was its reach. It wasn't just confined to construction sites, it extended into the offices of city officials and inspectors. Bribes flowed freely, greasing the wheels of bureaucracy and ensuring that no questions were asked. Permits were fast-tracked, safety violations overlooked, and investigations buried. Even the most blatant irregularities were dismissed without a second glance. To outsiders, Metro City's construction boom seemed like a testament to progress. But for those who knew the truth, it was a chilling reminder of the power Salerno wielded. By the early 1990s, the Mafia's control over Metro City's construction industry was nearly absolute. Entire neighborhoods were reshaped under their influence, with every brick and beam a symbol of corruption. But there was another, darker side to this story, one that wasn't visible in the gleaming facades of new skyscrapers. The materials used in many of these projects were substandard, chosen not for their quality but for their cost. Safety was an afterthought, sacrificed in the name of profit. It was a ticking time bomb, hidden in plain sight. Despite their dominance, Salerno and his crew operated in constant paranoia. They knew their empire was built on lies and fear, and any crack in the facade could bring it all tumbling down. To ensure loyalty, Salerno kept his associates under close watch. Betrayal was met with swift and brutal consequences. Even those closest to him weren't immune from suspicion. It was a world where trust was scarce, and survival depended on absolute obedience. For the people of Metro City, The Mafia's presence was an open secret. Most were too afraid to speak out, knowing the risks of defiance. Those who dared to challenge the status quo quickly found themselves targeted. Yet, in the face of such overwhelming power, whispers of resistance began to emerge. A few brave individuals started asking questions, poking holes in the Mafia's carefully constructed narrative. It was only a matter of time before these cracks would grow, threatening to expose the rot beneath the city's shiny new skyline. As the skyscrapers continued to rise, so too did the body count. Accidents on job sites became all too common, with little investigation into their causes. Workers were expendable, their lives a small price to pay for the Mafia's growing fortune. For Salerno, it was just business, a ruthless calculation that left no room for empathy or regret. But even he couldn't anticipate the storm that was brewing, one that would threaten to tear down everything he had built. Metro City's skyline was a monument to progress, ambition, and power, but beneath its towering structures lay a foundation of corruption, fear, and blood. The cost of the city's transformation was far greater than anyone could imagine, and the true price was yet to be revealed. In the early 1990s, Daniel Vega was a rising star in Metro City's Department of Building Inspections. Known for his meticulous work and unwavering commitment to public safety, Vega quickly gained a reputation as someone who couldn't be bribed or intimidated, a rarity in a city where corruption often operated in plain sight. His career seemed promising, but his determination to uphold the law would soon put him in the crosshairs of one of the city's most dangerous criminal enterprises. As Metro City's skyline expanded, Vega began to notice troubling patterns in the projects he inspected. Construction permits were being approved at an unprecedented rate, often bypassing standard safety protocols. Materials used in some of the city's largest developments failed to meet basic quality standards, raising serious concerns about the safety of the buildings. Yet these violations were consistently overlooked, with no repercussions for the developers or contractors involved. At first, Vega thought these issues were isolated incidents, slip-ups in an industry rushing to meet high demand. But as he delved deeper into the paperwork, he discovered a troubling consistency. The same companies were involved in nearly every problematic project, and their names were linked to an alarming number of safety violations. Even more suspiciously, these companies seemed to face no consequences, their permits and contracts pushed through with remarkable ease. Vega's unease grew when he attempted to escalate his concerns. Each time he submitted reports detailing the irregularities, they disappeared into a bureaucratic black hole. His supervisors dismissed his findings, insisting there was no cause for alarm. Yet the evidence was undeniable: substandard materials, falsified safety inspections, and a growing number of workplace accidents. Something was deeply wrong, and Vega couldn't ignore it. Determined to get to the bottom of the issue, Vega began conducting his own investigation. In his off hours, he pored over public records, construction logs, and city contracts, slowly piecing together the puzzle. What he uncovered was chilling. The companies at the center of the irregularities were all tied to shell corporations linked to Vincent Salerno's criminal network. The Mafia's influence extended far beyond what Vega had imagined, controlling not just the construction companies but also the city officials responsible for regulating them. The deeper Vega dug, the more dangerous his work became. One evening, he returned to his car to find a threatening note tucked under the windshield wiper. Another time, he noticed a pair of men watching him from a black sedan parked near his apartment. The message was clear: stop investigating. But Vega refused to back down. He knew that lives were at stake. If the city continued to allow unsafe buildings to rise, it was only a matter of time before tragedy struck. Recognizing that he couldn't take on the Mafia alone, Vega decided to enlist outside help. He reached out to Claire Bennett, an investigative journalist known for her exposés on political corruption. Bennett was intrigued by Vega's findings and agreed to help him bring the story to light. Together, they began compiling evidence, documenting the Mafia's stranglehold on the construction industry. Their work was painstaking and risky. They uncovered evidence of bribes paid to city officials, fraudulent safety certifications, and Mafia-enforced labor contracts that left subcontractors with no choice but to comply. They also found proof of deadly consequences for those who resisted. Fires, accidental falls, and mysterious disappearances were all part of the Mafia's playbook for silencing dissent. Just as Vega and Bennett were preparing to go public with their findings, tragedy struck. One of Vega's closest colleagues, a fellow inspector who had been helping him gather evidence, died in a suspicious workplace accident. The official report labeled it a tragic mishap, but Vega knew better. His colleague had recently confided in him about receiving threats, and the circumstances of the accident were far too convenient to be coincidental. The loss was a devastating blow, but it only strengthened Vega's resolve. He and Bennett redoubled their efforts, determined to expose the truth no matter the cost. They knew they were up against a powerful enemy, one capable of silencing anyone who dared to challenge them. But they also knew that staying silent was no longer an option. As Vega worked tirelessly to compile the final pieces of evidence, he couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The Mafia was aware of his investigation, and their warnings were becoming more direct. Every step forward brought him closer to the truth and closer to danger. What Vega didn't realize was just how far the Mafia would go to protect their empire, or how high the stakes would climb in the battle for Metro City's future. As Daniel Vega and Claire Bennett intensified their investigation, the danger surrounding them escalated. The Mafia was well aware that someone was prying into their operations, and Vincent Salerno wasn't about to let years of carefully built power crumble. Marco Giordano, Salerno's trusted enforcer, was tasked with identifying and eliminating the threat before it could spiral out of control. For Vega, the walls were closing in. The first strike came one night as Vega was driving home from a late meeting with Bennett. Without warning, his car swerved violently as the brakes failed. Careening off the road, Vega barely managed to escape the wreckage as his car collided with a tree and erupted into flames. The crash left him with broken ribs and a fractured leg, but he was alive. Investigators ruled the incident an accident, but Vega knew better. His suspicions were confirmed when mechanics examining the wreck discovered deliberate tampering with the brake lines. The attack was a clear message: back off, or next time there would be no escape. Vega, confined to a hospital bed, began questioning whether continuing the investigation was worth the risk. But Bennett, undeterred by the threat, visited him daily, encouraging him to stay the course. The evidence they had already gathered was powerful, but it wasn't enough to bring down Salerno's empire. They needed more, and time was running out. Meanwhile, Bennett was facing threats of her own. Late one evening, she returned to her apartment to find her door ajar. Inside, her belongings were in disarray, papers scattered across the floor, and her laptop, the primary repository of their evidence, was missing. Shaken but determined, Bennett immediately backed up what remained of their files and doubled down on her efforts to uncover the truth. Through her journalistic connections, Bennett managed to obtain financial records that revealed a massive money laundering operation tied to Salerno's construction front companies. These records showed a paper trail of bribes paid to city officials, developers, and even union leaders, ensuring the Mafia's projects would proceed without interference. But the most damning evidence was a set of blueprints that exposed the use of dangerously substandard materials in several high-profile buildings. The implications were staggering. The city's iconic Skyline was not only a symbol of corruption, but also a ticking time bomb. As the investigation progressed, Salerno grew increasingly paranoid. He began questioning the loyalty of those around him, even Marco Giordano. Marco, who had spent years enforcing Salerno's will, now found himself under constant scrutiny. The pressure of being Salerno's right-hand man, coupled with the FBI's relentless pursuit of the Mafia, weighed heavily on him. The once fearless enforcer started to see cracks in the empire he had helped build. While Bennett worked tirelessly to protect their evidence, Vega began piecing together a timeline of deaths and disappearances linked to Salerno's operation. One name stood out: a young foreman who had refused to comply with the Mafia's demands years earlier. His body had been found in a river, and the case was ruled an accident. Vega uncovered witness testimony that had been buried, suggesting foul play. The evidence pointed directly to Marco, who had been dispatched to silence the foreman. With this new information, Vega and Bennett decided to make their findings public. They planned a press conference to expose the Mafia's stranglehold on the construction industry, armed with documents, witness statements, and photographs. But the Mafia struck first. On the eve of the conference, Bennett's car was firebombed outside her office. She wasn't inside, but the message was unmistakable. The attack pushed Vega and Bennett to their breaking point. Every move they made was being watched, and their lives were in constant danger. Salerno's reach seemed limitless, and the question loomed, how could they outmaneuver an enemy who always seemed one step ahead? What Vega and Bennett didn't know was that someone within the Mafia's inner circle was also beginning to crack. Marco Giordano, long Salerno's most loyal enforcer, was harboring doubts. Years of carrying out Salerno's brutal orders had taken their toll, and the growing pressure from law enforcement was pushing him toward a breaking point. He had seen firsthand the consequences of crossing Salerno, but the walls were closing in on the Mafia as well. Marco faced an impossible choice: stay loyal and risk going down with the ship, or betray Salerno in a desperate bid to save himself. The stage was set for a dramatic turn. Vega and Bennett were running out of time, Marco was grappling with his conscience, and Salerno was tightening his grip on anyone who could expose him. As the city continued to bask in the glow of its shiny new skyline, the dark truths that built it were closer than ever to being revealed. But the question remained, would the evidence be enough to bring Salerno to justice, or would the cost of exposing the truth prove too high? The pressure mounted on all sides as Daniel Vega and Claire Bennett moved closer to exposing the Mafia's grip on Metro City's construction industry. But for every step forward, they faced another obstacle, another reminder of the enemy they were up against. Salerno's operation was unraveling at the edges, but the core of his power remained intact, fortified by fear, loyalty, and violence. Marco Giordano, long Salerno's enforcer, found himself in a battle of his own, torn between his duty to Salerno and the weight of his conscience. Vega and Bennett's investigation was no longer a secret. Word of their efforts had reached Salerno, who viewed their actions as a direct threat to his empire. To Salerno, the idea of losing control was unthinkable. The construction business had become the backbone of his operation, generating millions of dollars and allowing him to control the city's development. To let it fall apart was to lose everything he had spent decades building. In response, Salerno escalated his efforts to silence the pair. Surveillance on Vega and Bennett became more aggressive, their phones tapped, their movements tracked. Bennett noticed unfamiliar cars parked near her office and home, while Vega, recovering from his injuries, felt increasingly isolated. The attacks grew more brazen, culminating in the firebombing of Bennett's car. Every move they made felt like a gamble, every day a question of survival. Despite the escalating threats, the investigation continued. Bennett focused on gathering the final pieces of evidence, particularly a critical financial ledger that tied Salerno directly to the fraudulent shell companies and bribes. The ledger was the smoking gun, detailing years of payments to city officials, union leaders, and even law enforcement. Obtaining it, however, required help from an unexpected source. Marco Giordano, long the enforcer of Salerno's will, was beginning to crack under the pressure. Years of carrying out brutal orders had left him hollow, and the FBI's increased scrutiny of the Mafia left him in a precarious position. Giordano knew that when Salerno's empire began to crumble, those closest to him would be the first to take the fall. His loyalty had protected him for years, but now it felt like a trap. What pushed Giordano toward a breaking point was an incident involving a young construction worker. The worker, a father of two, had approached Salerno's crew with concerns about the unsafe conditions on a high-rise project. Giordano had been ordered to handle the situation, but the worker's desperation and fear lingered in Marco's mind long after the job was done. The man's death was ruled an accident, another statistic in an industry rife with dangers, but Marco knew the truth. Marco's growing doubts didn't go unnoticed. Salerno, ever paranoid, began watching his enforcer more closely, testing his loyalty with increasingly violent orders. Marco, however, saw an opportunity. Vega and Bennett's investigation had already shaken the foundation of Salerno's operation, and Marco realized he could use the chaos to his advantage. He reached out to Vega anonymously, leaving an encrypted message with a promise of information. The message led to a clandestine meeting in a dimly lit parking garage. Marco, shrouded in a hood and avoiding cameras, handed over a USB drive containing critical files. The drive included the ledger Bennett had been searching for, along with internal emails and photographs tying Salerno to construction site sabotage and worker intimidation. Marco offered no explanation, only a warning that Salerno wouldn't go down without a fight. With this new evidence, Vega and Bennett prepared to release their findings. They knew they had to act quickly. Salerno was becoming increasingly erratic, issuing orders to eliminate anyone he perceived as a threat. The Mafia's once cohesive operation was splintering under the weight of investigations and internal dissent. Marco's betrayal, though secret for now, had set off ripples within the organization that could not be undone. As Vega and Bennett worked to finalize their report, they realized the evidence they now possessed was enough to bring the Mafia to its knees. But it wasn't just about evidence anymore. Their investigation had uncovered a network of corruption so vast it implicated not just the Mafia but also powerful figures in the city's government. Exposing Salerno meant exposing the entire system, and the risks were higher than ever. Salerno, sensing the noose tightening, began lashing out in desperation. Construction sites connected to his shell companies were abandoned overnight, files destroyed, and key players disappeared. But no amount of damage control could stop the truth from coming out. Vega and Bennett were on the verge of blowing the entire operation wide open, but they also knew the danger they faced was greater than ever. As the city's skyline gleamed in the distance, the fight for justice was approaching its climax. Salerno's empire, built on fear and corruption, was teetering on the edge. But with so many lives at stake and so many powerful enemies, the question remained, could Vega and Bennett survive long enough to bring the truth to light? The day of reckoning for Metro City arrived as Daniel Vega and Claire Bennett prepared to unveil their investigation. Armed with a mountain of evidence, including financial ledgers, construction blueprints, and witness testimonies, they had everything they needed to dismantle the Mafia's grip on the city's skyline. But exposing the truth was not without its risks. The threats that had followed them throughout their investigation were reaching a fever pitch, and both Vega and Bennett knew that Salerno would do whatever it took to protect his empire. The press conference was set for noon at a downtown venue, its location carefully chosen for maximum security. Bennett had enlisted the help of her colleagues to ensure the media turnout would be significant, while Vega worked with federal investigators to secure their findings. The FBI, long aware of Salerno's influence but unable to gather sufficient evidence, was eager to act on the files Marco Giordano had provided. However, Salerno was not going down quietly. In the days leading up to the event, Vega and Bennett received a barrage of anonymous threats, warning them to cancel. Bennett's office was vandalized again, and Vega's apartment was ransacked, though nothing critical was taken. Meanwhile, Vincent Salerno was losing control. His once loyal enforcer, Marco Giordano, had vanished, and whispers of betrayal were spreading through his organization. Salerno had spent decades building his empire on fear and loyalty, but now paranoia consumed him. He ordered a series of last-ditch efforts to silence Vega and Bennett, calling on his remaining operatives to clean up loose ends. Contractors, foremen, and even minor city officials tied to Salerno began disappearing, their loyalty no longer guaranteed. The city's construction sites ground to a halt, leaving projects abandoned and workers unpaid. What was once an empire of influence and wealth was crumbling under the weight of its own secrets. The morning of the press conference, Vega received a chilling message. A photograph of his family, taken without their knowledge, was sent to his phone, accompanied by a warning to walk away. For a brief moment, he considered backing out. The thought of putting his loved ones in danger weighed heavily on him, but Bennett reminded him why they had started this fight. Lives had already been lost because of the corruption and greed underpinning the city's skyline. If they stayed silent now, those lives would have been lost in vain. As the press conference began, the room buzzed with anticipation. Journalists, federal agents, and even a few local officials filled the venue, eager to hear what Vega and Bennett had uncovered. The evidence they presented was damning. Bennett outlined the financial web tying Salerno's shell companies to city officials, explaining how permits were fast-tracked and safety violations ignored in exchange for bribes. Vega followed with a detailed timeline of incidents on construction sites, accidents, fires, and mysterious disappearances all linked to Salerno's operation. The blueprints and materials analysis revealed the dangers lurking in some of the city's most prominent buildings, structures that could collapse under the weight of their corruption. Just as they were about to unveil the final piece of evidence, the financial ledger provided by Giordano, a commotion erupted outside. Armed men believed to be working for Salerno attempted to storm the venue. Security personnel, prepared for such a contingency, intervened and law enforcement arrived within minutes. The chaos only underscored the lengths to which Salerno would go to protect his empire. The press conference resumed once the situation was under control, and the ledger was revealed, tying Salerno directly to every aspect of the operation. News of the press conference spread like wildfire. Federal agents raided Salerno's properties that same evening, seizing documents, assets, and arresting dozens of his associates. Salerno himself attempted to flee the city but was captured at a private airstrip, his face plastered across every news outlet in the region. The fall of his empire sent shockwaves through the construction industry and City Hall, leading to resignations, arrests, and a sweeping overhaul of regulatory practices. For Vega and Bennett, the victory was bittersweet. The investigation had come at great personal cost. Vega's career in the city's inspection department was over. His relentless pursuit of justice had made him too many enemies in positions of power. Bennett faced similar challenges, her work celebrated by some but criticized by others for exposing corruption that many preferred to leave buried. Both of them knew they would live the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders, haunted by the enemies they had made. Marco Giordano's fate remained a mystery. He disappeared after handing over the ledger, and while rumors swirled about his possible involvement with federal witness protection, no one could confirm his whereabouts. His betrayal had been the linchpin in Salerno's downfall, but his silence ensured he would remain a ghost, a figure forever tied to the shadows of Metro City's dark past. As Metro City's skyline glimmered under the evening sun, its beauty no longer masked the corruption that had built it. Vega and Bennett's work had revealed the hidden costs of the city's ambition, the lives lost, the laws broken, and the dangers ignored. While justice had been served, the scars left behind were a sobering reminder that power, once unchecked, could wreak havoc on even the most towering dreams. Thank you for joining us on Mystery Minds. Stories like these remind us that even the brightest skylines can cast the darkest shadows. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And as always, stay curious and stay safe. Until next time, keep unraveling the mysteries around you.